Hello, stroke warriors and families everywhere. Welcome to another real special interview today. Today, our guest is Dr. Kenneth Monaghan from Dublin, Ireland. How are you, Kenneth?
Great, Ralph. It's lovely to speak to you finally. We've been in touch a lot on the internet
Yes,
through LinkedIn, and great to speak to you finally.
yeah, it is. It's a pleasure. Thank you for doing this. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what your initiative is that you do in particular?
Yes, well, I originally qualified as a physiotherapist or a physical therapist in America 32 years ago. And
Wow.
for the first half of my career, first 16 years, I specialized in sports medicine. And I actually worked in Florida at one stage for a couple of years when I had just qualified. It was a great experience, and I had worked in some rehabilitation there. So I worked with professional teams, and I worked in clinics, and I looked after people with sore backs and necks. And eventually, I went back to college and I did my master's degree in sports medicine, and I did my PhD in an area of ankle injuries. And I eventually got a job in University College Dublin, which is on the opposite side of where I live now. I live in Donegal in Northwest Ireland.
Oh,
And I suppose, I met my wife, Maria, who's from Donegal. She's from Donegal in Northwest Ireland. And we decided that it would be better to live in this part of the world. But around that time, I had become very interested in different therapies that could help patients, especially stroke patients. And I suppose the first one that I found fascinating was a thing called mirror therapy. So I had an opportunity when I came here to Donegal to work with a number of stroke patients in their own homes. And I suppose it confirmed for me that there was definitely, a need for something for these patients to give them a little bit of guidance. And not just the patients themselves or the stroke survivors, but their caregivers, their family members also seem to be struggling. At a time when somebody, should be looking forward to going home, the patients seem to have the opposite. They seem to be feeling like a dark cloud over their heads. So about 13 years ago, Ralph, I joined a university in the Northwest called Atlantic Technological University. And from the moment that I started there, I started to build a research group based around the brain and new treatments for the brain. And we call that group the Neuroplasticity Research Group. And I've raised probably in the guts of $2 million for that group. And I've had five PhD students and a number of master's students graduate from our research group. And we developed a lot of technology, so medical devices and web-based platforms, and we developed kind of, I suppose, uh, machines and things that patients could potentially use in their own homes. But I always felt that it was a wee bit unfair in some ways to expect people to, to pay an awful lot of money to try and rehabilitate at home. And I knew that a lot of the therapies, so mirror therapy and a thing called cross education, which we might speak about again, I
yes.
knew that those could be done very cost effectively in your own home. And that was the nub of me writing a book that came out in July last year. And that book, I think, has been read by thousands of people at this stage. And I've had great feedback because it seems to be giving people confidence and a little bit of guidance. So when a person is discharged home, at that time when they maybe need a little bit of advice, sometimes they don't get the best therapy. I know in Ireland, patients sometimes don't have access to huge volumes of therapy at a time when they're a little bit vulnerable. The book seems to be giving people a little bit of confidence and advice. So, it's been actually I feel very proud because, I've been speaking to people all over the world, just like yourself, people who've, maybe purchased the book or have gotten some advice from it. And yeah, that was the idea. I suppose I'm coming to the end of my own career now, and I kind of feel like I'd like to give something back, and it's been very rewarding. So, talking to your listeners and people that might benefit from some of the information, I'm thrilled if that can happen.
I'm real interested too because you not only do you do the university work, but In your book, you address a lot through the website, the book, everything that you do about caregivers. Talk a little
Yes.
bit about that for me, would you?
Yeah, it's I suppose look at as far as I'm concerned, it's very difficult for somebody to, undertake a rehabilitation program, a physical rehabilitation program at home by themselves. So, in an ideal world, if I had my way, I think every stroke survivor should have some person to help them, be that a family member or a friend or whatever, just because that person can be a fantastic help. So, they can be trustworthy, they can explain things very well, they can supervise and prevent somebody from, injuring themselves. And they can also be very positive in terms of, you know, belief systems and, encouraging and explaining and, making people motivated to kind of do the type of therapies that are needed to get the best success, I suppose. So the book was very much written for caregivers. I suppose the title says, Lights, Mirrors, Action, a guide for caregivers and stroke survivors um, to transform their lives after a stroke. So the caregiver was the first thought. And the book is very much written very easy to understand. So it's not written for medical professionals, although there's 140 footnotes there that you can look at the information and science if you want. But it was written to be able to easily understand, and I suppose to try and become a bit of a thought leader and kind of get people to know me. Over the last year and a half, I've been posting quite a lot of weekly newsletters and regular daily posts on my LinkedIn site. And at this stage, I've 9 or 10,000 followers and connections, and I'm hoping to grow that over the next few years. And yeah, people seem to need the information, and I'm finding, I suppose, I'll hear this from you a little bit later, but what we experience here in Ireland seems to be the case all over the world, that
Yes.
patients sometimes need this, advice and some sort of help or assistance. So hopefully this can be something that can help them as well.
I was interested as part of that caregiver and Lights Mirror Action. You talk about structured daily routines. Um, how does that reduce the stress for the caregivers and survivors?
Well, all of the stroke associations nowadays, and this was very good timing for me and when my book came out. When I started off, when I was qualified as a physiotherapist 32 years ago, the advice at the time was that, if you didn't, whatever progress and what recovery you had gotten after 6 months, six, maybe 9 months tops, that was probably all you were going to get. But now, because people are more aware, now because we have scanners and we're able to see what happens in the brain a little bit better, it's been proven beyond doubt that your brain can change at any moment in time based on what you do. And of course, a lot of the new advice from stroke associations, the Irish and the UK Stroke Association, as an example, they're recommending that people would try and do, even up to 2 to 3 hours of repetitive exercises every day, if it's possible. Now we know that that's not going to be possible for some people, um, and we know that for some people to do some of the exercises and the programs, they need assistance. So, for example, to do stretches for your shoulder and your arm, it can be very helpful to have somebody that gives you a little bit of assistance there. But if you do that amount of therapy, then apparently you give yourself a much better chance of, the best recovery or the best rebuild that you can get. And of course, I suppose the skill is to try and motivate people. And that's where your caregiver comes in, because they can help and do that. And, they can record what people are doing and they can acknowledge and praise and they can help and, they're very trustworthy. So I think if somebody is going to do that amount of therapy, they probably need to structure a simple program that they would do on a daily basis. And, a program that can be started at different times based on how you're feeling. Because it's, my experience from talking to people who've had a stroke is that a lot of them suffer from fatigue and they can be very tired and it can hit you just when you could have therapy organized in your clinic at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that might be the time when you feel absolutely jaded and absolutely wrecked. So to be able to, that's why your home can be a very good place to do your therapy, because you have that flexibility to kind of start it in the afternoon or the early evening, or do as much or as little as you want, you know. So I think structure is very important for all of us. I mean, myself, I'm the same. You know, I get up in the morning time and I take a piece of paper and I write a list of what I have to do for the day, and I tick that off, and I find it very rewarding. And I think people like that, you know. So therapy can be a little bit like that too. If you have a little plan and you do your exercises, or you attempt to do them, and you tick off things, you can kind of feel quite rewarded at the end of a day, and maybe it helps to motivate people a little bit as well.
Yeah, repetitiveness and consistency. I
I think
found,
so.
yeah, I found that out after a few years and made my recovery become great. So
I
you
think
had some real significant breakthroughs in your stroke recovery research. For example, work in 3D motion analysis. What is that?
Well, uh, I would have worked with 3D motion analysis when I was doing my own research
Okay.
20 years ago. But we don't use motion analysis for stroke patients at the moment. I mean, what motion analysis equipment is, it allows you, I imagine that I take you into our lab, Ralph, and I put little markers, little reflective markers on different parts of your body. And if I have cameras all around the room and you go and move, then I can actually I can record what you're doing, and then on the screen I can make a stick figure diagram, and I can actually work out, you know, maybe where you have little tightnesses, and where you're walking a little bit unusual. So there are analysis labs all over the world that do that. Our one doesn't involve that. We primarily worked with mirror therapy, as I was mentioning, cross education of strengthening, and a thing called sensory substitution. Those would have been the three innovative therapies that we would have worked. And we'd have been combining them, you see, in different equipment. And that's probably where there was a lot of novelty.
Oh, okay, okay. What and is the mechatronic managed rehab
Yeah,
something you've done or doing?
it's something we're doing at the moment. We're working at the moment on what's called a web-based platform, which the idea is to allow patients to be monitored and supervised by a therapist remotely. So, imagine you were being discharged from your rehabilitation hospital in the morning time, and imagine that the therapist there said to you, well, Ralph, when you go home now, you and your family, I'm giving you a website that you go on to, and here's a little password to go into it. And I'm giving you two small pieces of equipment that you can use. When you log into that website, you will have access to Ken Monaghan. He'll be your physiotherapist. Now, he lives 1,000 miles away or 1,000 kilometers away, but he still be able to keep in touch with you. But when you use the equipment records everything you do. So if you move your arms and you strengthen in your arms or your legs or balance and things like that, everything you do, it records and it sends it to that computer through the cloud. So when I wake up in the morning time, potentially this is what will happen. I'll see that Ralph Cortez has done his exercises. I'll see perhaps that he's made a little bit of progress, because he might have been doing 10 the first day, and now today he's doing 15 or he's doing 20, and we can have a record of it. I can decide, I actually don't think I need to talk to Ralph today. Seems to be going very well. Or else we can organize an online chat, and we can talk. And potentially, people could be, monitored and treated remotely on that platform or that website. All of the information that I would feel would be very helpful for you to read about. So to educate you about neuroplasticity, and about anything I think could help you have confidence after your stroke, could be on there. And we'd probably also put up videos of the exercises and things that you might need to do as well. So we could, I suppose it's the start of a potential piece of equipment, a piece of equipment that could help people in the future. So we're just experimenting and ready to do our clinical trials with something like that at the moment.
And that's
Um,
kind of a collaboration with the patient. But
yes,
yeah, become a team. I've always said you've got to be the captain of your own team as a survivor. You know
yeah.
that you need to have some tools to be able to do that. What is the mirror strengthening brace? Are you still working with that?
Yeah, that would have been the first piece of equipment that we developed. So I presume all of your listeners would know what mirror therapy is, Ralph. Should I describe that?
Yeah, please,
Um,
just in case.
yeah, so mirror therapy is an interesting therapy. It first actually was developed in the early 90s, not for stroke at all. It was actually developed for a thing called phantom limb pain. So imagine that you have lost, in an accident, you lose your right hand. Well, your right hand you're going to almost certainly suffer from phantom limb pain. Your brain is actually going to struggle to understand where your hand has gone, and it's going to manifest itself as pain. So, and you'll probably even imagine that the hand is still there. So this brilliant Indian researcher, Ramachandran, he came up with the idea that if you sat at your desk there and you put your two arms in on the desk, so imagining that your right hand is missing, and if you take a mirror, a simple 10 or $15 mirror, and you stand it vertically so that the reflective side is facing your left hand, your good hand, and the non-reflective side is facing the hand that's missing. And if you tilt your head and you look into the reflective side of the mirror, you'll see an image of your left hand, but it will look exactly like it's your right hand. And of course, that's the key piece of information, because when you look at the reflection in the mirror, very quickly your brain receives information that sensory information that makes it start to create pathways as if it was the hand that's missing. And what they found with phantom limb pain was that very almost instantaneously people had great cures from it because it desensitized the brain. And from there, people started to suggest that maybe it could have an effect with stroke patients as well. If you couldn't move your hand, but you covered with a mirror and you looked at the image of the good hand. And a lot of research, not just our own lab, but a lot of research has been done all over the world now to show that that can benefit people. I mean, I've had it would be wrong for me to say to you that this is a miracle cure for everybody. It's not. But for some people, it can be a miracle cure. I've had one of the first people that worked with us in our labs a number of years ago. He didn't come to us until he was 6 months after a stroke, and he had hardly any movement in his hand. And that man, 6 months later, well, not even 6 months, I'd say about 3 months later, he had probably about 50, 60% of his movement returned. And then over the course of the next 10 weeks or next couple of months, he's probably 90, 95% now. So he's a great example of how it worked very well for. Other people don't get that, but it's a type of therapy that's very cost effective, because everybody can purchase you can go to Walmart, I'm sure, and you can buy a 10 or $15 mirror very simply. You can go on Amazon, you can buy mirror boxes that are available. There are a number of companies that provide those, and that's what they're for. Um, and they can be set up very much on your kitchen table. And definitely there's enough evidence, there's enough research out there to suggest that it's definitely something that's safe to do, and it's something that you can try to do. And I think this is what your listeners should be thinking to themselves, that there's probably about 30 different therapies that have some evidence behind them that are safe and that, have been proven to show some benefit. But for the person themselves, it's up to them to kind of trial and, test different things and decide what really works for them. And you see, if you become very active in your treatment like that and you become proactive, apparently you get there's a much better chance of you getting, an even better recovery, because that's the way medicine is going now. People are being encouraged very much to become active in their treatments and become, not be passive, not be there waiting for the person to say, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that. Try, if we can identify things that are safe, and you try them, you'll probably figure out which works best for you. Now, the second therapy that you were mentioning there in terms of the cross education and the mirror therapy, it's a thing called cross education of strengthening. This idea, Ralph, has been in existence for a long, long time, but it's the idea that imagine I get you to go to your local gym, and I say to you, for the next 6 weeks, you have to just strengthen the right side of your body. Okay. So
Okay.
imagine you would do that. We would never probably recommend that, but let's say that we did. So after 6 weeks, the right side of your body will be much, much stronger, as you can imagine. But amazingly, your left side of the body, even though it hasn't done any active movement, it can be up to 40% stronger because there's an electricity overload. There's like a neural overload into that side. And as you can imagine, that would have great potential for somebody who can't move one side of their body. So what we did, which was novel, was we created a piece of equipment that allows people to do strengthening exercises with the good side while also doing mirror therapy at the same time. So what we found in our trials was that, that had extra potential, and but a piece of equipment would have to be provided for somebody to do that. Now, this piece of equipment may be available in the future, depending on how our trial, depending on
Yeah.
whether but what I was doing for people was I was breaking those two therapies down as individual therapies, because as I said earlier, you can purchase a very simple mirror and you can do mirror therapy at your table for, 5 or 10 minutes or whatever you feel. And I make a recommendation maybe of how many times you do that in the book. And then I was also saying that a little bit later, it's feasible that you could purchase a little bit of a resistance band. You can purchase those for $5 or $10 as well. And you can simply attach it to your door, and you can actually do some very simple strengthening exercises either in a seat or when you're standing. And you should be able to avail of that cross education effect as well. So you can do these things, and nobody's suggesting that you would just do one of those things the whole time. I think people sometimes get a little bit worried because they say, well, I don't think it's a good thing if you just strengthen, your good side of your body all the time. And I agree with that. But what I do think is that if you only, if you spend 5 or 10 minutes a day during one session, then it's capable of stimulating your brain in a way that possibly helps you with this recovery. So the secret is to be doing a number of different sessions, perhaps of different therapies that have been proven to be safe, and that you like and that you kind of are motivated to do. And I think that's kind of the big part of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, I the whole stroke warrior radio is based on the fact we didn't know what we didn't know. Nobody told us, or they told us this is as good as it gets at 3 or 6 months, which is not true. And a lot of that education doesn't come unless you self-advocate and get out there and find this stuff out. So that's
Yes.
why we do what we're doing, so people can learn that stuff. That sounds really fascinating. I'd love to talk to you more about that. And well, of course, I've ordered the book already, so I'll check that all out.
I'll email you a copy of the book as well. There'll be no problems. And I mean, look at Ralph. If some of your listeners would like to get, if they really feel, you feel free to pass it on to people if they really are. I think they might like to read a chapter, or they like to see a verse. Because at this stage, I'm actually really delighted to try and get it into the hands of as many people who'd like it. Is that okay? Whether that's an online version of it or whether it's a physical version of it, and I'll send it to people as well. There's no problem. I'm not here to try and I won't be making too much money from a book. I don't think people do, but what I do want to get is I get I feel very proud when people come back and have used the book and find it successful, or it's given them a little bit of confidence. Just so I was going to say one thing as well too, Ralph. Uh, I suppose the earlier that somebody starts some of the therapies. So, one thing that I think is very important for a person after a stroke is to make sure that you don't lose lose movement and flexibility, especially in your arm. Um, so the earlier that you start to do very simple movements and stretches, which we describe, the more that you will make sure that you don't become rigid and you become very tight. Because if you, I suppose, if somebody hasn't moved their arm for weeks and months, the tissues start to become very tight and become very, rigid. And in a way, no matter how much electricity comes back, then you're going to really struggle to have any movement at that point. So the secret is to try and keep keep a little bit of movement in your arm and your leg, until hopefully that electricity comes back to allow movement to take place. But you have to kind of maintain things. So that's where your caregiver can be very helpful as well, is that, you know, in those early days when you come home, if you haven't got much movement in your arm and your fingers and your hand, well, somebody can help you to kind of stretch those a little bit, you know, and
Yeah,
keep the tissues viable, so that, you know, you get a better chance. So look, people can, your brain can change at any time after a stroke, there's no doubt. But if your body has become totally rigid, and you know, then you are going to struggle to be able to regain things. So we have to be realistic as well. So I suppose, look at, if somebody's coming out of a rehabilitation center or an acute hospital, that's the time to read this information, or at least some
yeah,
of this information. Maybe it'll give you confidence, you know, and give you a bit of guidance. Because I suppose it's difficult. There's so much information out there. It's very difficult for people to know what to take and what not to take. Isn't that right?
yes, very true. Well, and it's difficult to understand too that you don't go to physio twice a week and that's it. You go home, you got four more days that you should be doing stuff at home as well, you know?
It is, and the other thing too, Ralph, which, and I've a nice chapter about this. Chapter 4 is about the home and why your home is a brilliant place. People underestimate their own home, in terms of it being a rehabilitation centre. There's a very good friend of mine in Ireland. He's a professor in Trinity College Dublin, and Ian Robertson is his name. And Ian wrote a brilliant book a couple of years ago called The Winner Effect. It's a very interesting book, but one concept that he mentions in the book is that apparently people, when they're in their own home environment, and it's because of the sights that are there, the sounds and the smells and the familiarity of it, apparently our bodies release substantially more testosterone, which is this rebuilding hormone that, you know, helps us. And we would never think about that. We would never realize that. But Ian identifies that, and that's just one of the small things that can be a help when you're in your own home. You know, we like being in our own home because it makes us feel, we actually feel more self-efficacy when we're in our home. We actually feel more confident that we can do things, and people underestimate that.
Yeah,
They underestimate how how important it is that neighbors and friends and people come in, and that social side of things. That's actually very important as well.
yes,
And you know, and you can probably testify to that. Um,
absolutely.
but what people, I suppose, this is really the big thing. People have to have the confidence in some way to not be not really lose heart when their doctor and their therapist say, look, you're going to be going home now and you're going to continue the next phase of your therapy, and not to have that dark cloud over your head, because your home can be a brilliant place if you have a bit of guidance, you see. And as you say there, if you're just dependent on the 2 times you go per week to meet your therapist, then you're going to diminish your chance of getting a better recovery. Whereas if you go home and you have a program, a sensible, simple program, and you're going 2 times a week to meet your therapist who can verify and prove that you're making progress, then that can work out very well. You know, and
Yes,
a lot of people can benefit from that simple advice.
yeah, and some of it's simple stuff. I mean, you could take a gallon of milk and try and exercise with it. I mean, it can be so simple, but so
Yes,
effective.
it
Yeah, I
can,
agree.
and for those people who can go for what, you know, even take a few steps safely, or even are able to walk, then walking is a tremendous exercise. And again, it's very undervalued, because, in my opinion, the reason is because it doesn't cost anything, and
Yeah,
sometimes people don't value things that don't cost anything. But there's an awful lot of brilliant research now out, new research that is showing that when the person goes for, you know, 20, 30 minutes of a walk, our brains release these really important growth factors, and chemicals that help strengthen our brain cells and make us much less likely to get, you know, Alzheimer's, dementia in the future. And also, it has to be an assistance to this neuroplasticity. So, for every person out there, even if you haven't had a stroke and you're listening to this, then the World Health Organization is recommending that we all go for 30 minutes of a walk every day, or 5 days a week. and they want you to walk at an intensity or a pace where you could talk to somebody comfortably, but you couldn't sing to them.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
okay.
if you tried to sing to them, you would be out of breath and it wouldn't work. So
And
that's
you'd
what
probably lose a friend too.
I think so. So that's what, that's the kind of exercise that everybody should strive to achieve if you want to try and stop yourself, and not just getting strokes, but also cardiovascular disease and diabetes and obesity and those things. So I have a lovely chapter in that I send to people regularly. It's called One Step, One Foot After the Other, and it's chapter 13. So maybe it'll be lucky for some people, but
Yeah, there you go.
it outlines a lot of the really new simple research that they found out, and just proves that walking is very good for people. Actually, one funny thing, and I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning it, but there's a man in New York who has set up a company called People Walkers Incorporate. Actually, I'm going to find his name out in case he ever hears this, and he might be grateful. So he has set up a company called People's Walkers. I'll tell you now. Yeah, the People Walker, he's become known as. He actually, Ralph, has a very nice TED talk. So his name is Chuck McCarthy. Chuck McCarthy
Okay.
from the People Walker Incorporate. And Chuck, a number of years ago, set up a company, and his company is that you can hire him to go for a walk with you.
What a
And
novel idea.
oh, yes. And people joked and said, oh, look at that's a crazy idea. Nobody will use that. But actually, as it turns out, there's quite a few people that like to, there's a lot of people that sometimes like to have company and maybe somebody to talk to and a bit of maybe feel a little bit safer. They feel they just like that. So Chuck has a good business for himself in New York. The People Walker Incorporate. So
Nice.
anyway, if you said to me the one piece of information to give everybody, your listeners, it probably would be that everybody should get out walking for, up to 20, 30 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week. And that would really save our healthcare systems, I think, overnight.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that saved my recovery after over 6 years is that nobody, with the cane or the walker, nobody said, take a walk with it. I
Yeah,
think if I would have taken a walk with my cane or walker, I would have improved every day. Because once I did start 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, it started to improve. Then I didn't need the cane anymore. I found out about water therapy and running on a water treadmill. There's
good.
so many things out there.
And Scott, Ralph, can I ask you, what do you think your listeners are, from your experience, what would benefit them, in terms of information, or in what facet should the information be given to people? Because, sometimes a book can seem a little bit overwhelming for people. They might say, well, look, it's far too much in there. But is there a need to produce kind of little pamphlets or little leaflets that has some basic ideas on it that would give a person confidence, or that could be handed to somebody as they're leaving the rehabilitation center, and to kind of guide them and make them feel kind of more comfortable? Is that
Yeah,
what
I think
we?
there's probably several areas to do that. Unfortunately, the medical facilities aren't as receptive as we'd like, but I think, for example, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the emotional and psychological support. There should be a flyer to say, hey, this is what you're gonna go through. You know,
Yeah,
um, stuff like these are the therapies available. I had physical therapy and occupational therapy, physical therapy for long, and I still go. The OT I only had for a couple of weeks. I didn't find out till a year later I needed it for my handwriting,
right.
and 7 years later for my cognitive issues. So I didn't find out about speech therapy until 7 years, for my swallowing difficulties.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the main things that I try and focus is that there's like 9 different areas you should be checking into. It's
Yes.
not just physio and OT. There's there's a bunch more. There's speech, there's mental health, all those things, those kind of flyers. That makes a lot of sense. I've never thought of it that way, of getting some kind of flyers.
Well, you see, I think from my experience, it's people sometimes start looking for the information a little bit late, all right? It's never too late, obviously, but I think 2 weeks out from somebody leaving, when you get that word that you're going to be discharged in 2 weeks' time, that's the time that you need somebody to put something in your hand that says, okay, this is what neuroplasticity is in a very simple to understand way. And that happens every minute of every day, right? And so
Correct.
know that and be confident that that can happen. Something that says your recovery can definitely keep going regardless of how long it has been since your stroke. Something that says your home has fabulous benefits and these are what they are. And something that says your caregiver or your family member or friend can be a brilliant, in fact, probably an absolute essential person to help you get better and not to
Oh,
fear that.
absolutely.
Yeah, just because they're not a physical therapist or they're not an occupational therapist doesn't mean that they haven't got fantastic traits that are absolutely essential, you see. And I suppose that's what we need to kind of get into the hands of people. And it'll help a lot more people. I suppose the other thing too, Ralph, it's impossible to I suppose when I started out writing the book, it's impossible to address every area, of course, So you mentioned the cognitive issues, the emotional issues, the mental health issues,
Yeah.
the physical and speech and things. So my book set out primarily to look at the physical side of a recovery. And, I recommend, books that, within it, I kind of guide people to where they can find information for those other things. But I find when I've seen a lot of the handouts and the information leaflets that hospitals provide for people, and they do as best to good, they try their best. But sometimes I feel sometimes those pamphlets and those leaflets and informations, they have too much information in them because they
Yes.
always start off by saying, here's what a stroke is and things like that. And in my mind, and maybe I didn't get this right, but I think a stroke survivor knows what a stroke and they don't need to have that information. They want you know th they want the physical side of things and they want to know what's safe and they want just from that point of view. So that's where I didn't put any of that kind of information into it because I didn't think nobody's going to read all of that. You can
Yeah.
find that elsewhere. So that was really that idea.
Well, and I think one of the difficulties for this stroke, and I call them stroke warriors. You have a choice. You can be a stroke survivor or a
Oh
stroke
yes.
warrior. So I call them stroke warriors. A stroke warrior's choice, or if you give them a bunch of pamphlets and stuff that their cognitive issues, they can't read, and they're not going to be able to read all of that in most cases. They're not going
Yeah.
to be able to understand it in most cases. So there's an issue there too as well. I know when I got out, I didn't understand anything. It was very difficult for me to, even sit down and read a newspaper article. So that's something that, again, the caregiver can be an integral part of. Your book stresses emotional support for both the survivors and caregivers. What strategies do you recommend for maintaining emotional well-being?
Well, I mean, look at I suppose I'm saying to you that a caregiver and family member is a trusted person in that person's life. So I think at this vulnerable time, you need somebody that fills that position, somebody that you trust. Um, I think that you have to have somebody. I think my experience with family members and caregivers are that those people want to do anything they can to help you. Isn't it? Would not be a fair point. They want to do anything, and the problem for them is they feel paralyzed because they are afraid that they will do harm. Um,
Yeah,
you know, I run a private clinic in my local area, where I see patients a couple of evenings a week, and this is the biggest problem when patients come, with a problem, if they've hurt their back or they've hurt their neck. No, 99 times out of 100, it's more likely the person won't have done any exercises or they won't have tried anything because they'll be afraid that they'll do harm, as opposed to doing too much, if that makes sense. So a caregiver and a family member, uh, their issue is that they're paralyzed as well. And so, if they are the best, they're a lovely person to kind of be there in the background because they know that person so well and they have their best interests at heart and they just need the guidance that, hopefully my book, as part of some of the information, gives them, and give them confidence that, you're not going to cause that person to have another stroke. It's unlikely that that will happen just by doing physical exercises.
Yeah,
So, so and I suppose, look, a big part of being back in your own home as well is that sometimes some of the cognitive emotional issues that can be suppressed a little bit. I've read in research and also experienced that when people are in rehabilitation centers, I don't know if this is your experience, uh, it's not your home, so you're not really 100% relaxed there. But when you get home, sometimes the health professionals can kind of detect things in you a little bit better because you're kind of acting more normal when you're in your own place. So I think sometimes people get the needed services better from being at home
yeah,
afterwards because things can be detected that wouldn't be detected in the physical area. Is that okay?
yeah, yeah. One of the things that is really never explained is how can caregivers balance their own needs with the demands of providing care?
Well, that's a very that's a difficult thing for them to do. Because I think the quote I have in the book is you have to put on your own life jacket first, isn't that right?
Exactly.
Um,
Oh, I like that.
and it's true. So if I have a stroke and my wife is, looking after me and she basically gives me every inch of her energy and stamina and doesn't look after herself, she's going to collapse. And I'm sure lots of caregivers are the same. So you in a kind of you have to be a little bit selfish. You have to learn to be selfish. You have to learn that if you don't look after yourself, so if you're a caregiver, you have to get out for those walks as well and maybe create time, try and bring in other people, I suppose, to kind of, give you assistance and a hand. Ask the neighbors to do jobs around the house for you,
Take
it's not,
breaks. Yeah,
take breaks, yeah, and make sure that you look after your own mental health as well.
yeah,
And everybody, that's a very individual thing, but we sometimes look at it. Maybe it's a cultural thing, but people struggle sometimes to ask for help. I suppose that's it's kind of like if we're asking for help, we're kind of admitting defeat in some way. But uh, why stroke rehabilitation is very unique is that if I have a bad back or if I have a sore neck, a disc problem, those problems might last a few weeks and then they're gone. But most people who have had a stroke, they're looking at a number of months of therapy. So now we're into a different skill set here. We're looking at how do we motivate somebody to do that for that length of time? How does somebody, help you for that length of time and maintain their own sanity and also their own health as well. So
right.
yeah, I suppose just to say to people, look at it's not being selfish. You have to put on your own life jacket first. You have to look after yourself because if you go down, you won't be able to look after that person. And if it means that you have to get out of the house for a few hours and you have to arrange even respite care or whatever has to be arranged, that's the only thing that'll work, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time for this sessions. In other words, I'd love to talk to you again. I mean, this is
Oh, you can do.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Good, good.
We can talk again at some stage, or if your listeners have questions, just post them on to me, or maybe gather them and we can talk and answer some of them sometime if that's a
That'd be
help. Is that
great.
all right?
That'd be great. We'll put that out there. How did they find out more about what you're doing or where your book is or your website or whatever?
Yeah. Well, look at I have my website is based on the title of the book, so it's www.lightsmersaction.com. However, probably the best place that I post a lot of information and weekly newsletters is on my LinkedIn site. So I think I'll send that to you. Or that's how we got in touch originally. So every
Yeah,
week, every Friday, I post a newsletter with information, again, just advice for people on what they need to know. I like to talk about the psychology of it a lot, which is quite important as well. And the book, if people would like to buy it, then it's available on Amazon in ebook version and paperback and hardback. Definitely in the United States, it would be Amazon. That would be the
okay.
best place to get that. But as I say to you, I'll send you a PDF version of the book, and if you feel that people could benefit or they want it, feel free to give it to them as well. I mean,
Well, thank you very
the,
much. I will
the
do that.
now, there's a danger, the psychology of people. Sometimes when people get something for free, maybe they undervalue it. So I don't want that
Yeah,
to happen. There's just
yeah,
because I'm saying this doesn't mean the book is no good. But
yeah, right.
I'm actually just, I love to get it in the hands of people who might get some confidence from it, and I don't
Well,
mind
just a
how
little
they
bit
get that.
we've talked about it makes a lot of sense. So I hope we can get it in people's hands.
Yeah, brilliant.
Anything you want to add today?
No, I just have to say that probably one of the most rewarding things is just getting opportunities to talk to people like yourself on a regular basis because, meeting people from all around the world is fascinating, and I enjoy it, I have to say. So it's
Yeah,
um, it's
it
actually
really is fun.
it's actually 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening time here in Ireland, and I'm just getting ready to go out to a musical, and I'll
Wonderful. Well, you
so it's
enjoy it.
nice.
I've got more interviews because I'm just before noon here. So,
Oh, very good. Okay. Well,
all
look at
right.
Ralph. If I can give you information, you have my email address. My
Yes,
email address for other people is my first name, Kenneth, Kenneth, dot my second name, Monaghan, Monaghan, at atu.ie. So that's my email address, and people can feel free to email me and ask me
with
questions if they
questions.
want.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that.
That's
Well, I
brilliant.
appreciate your time today, and I look forward to our next session.
Let's keep in touch, and we'll talk again, Ralph. And good luck with your work. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, God bless. Bye bye.